Hey there, listener. I want to thank you for listening to the National Land Realty Podcast. Now, please remember to like, share, and review our show. If you can, take a second, hit pause, and give us a quick review. It only takes about a minute to write what you think about the content that you hear on this show. Good or bad, we want to hear it. Thank you in advance. Now on with the show. Throwing a disclaimer on this right now. I am sick as all get out, but the show must go on, right? So I'm going to run this intro. It's not going to sound the greatest, but this is a great episode. So welcome to episode number 27 of the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Now, this episode, I'm talking with Ryan Harris out of Little Rock, Arkansas, and we'll be talking about spot and stalk versus tree stand hunting. Ryan has a lifetime of experience in the outdoors, and he uses the lessons handed down through generations in his family. He's a part-time taxidermist with his company, Bonehead Taxidermy, in addition to his career as a land professional, and he's a member of the Quality Deer Management Association. This episode is a break from talking purely about land, and I tell you, sometimes it is just great to talk about the experience of the hunt. Now, sit back and enjoy the show. So I'm sitting here with Ryan Harris out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. And Ryan, tell me how you got to National Land.
Well, I had lost my job during COVID. I got laid off, and my wife had just kind of told me, like, you know, now's your chance to figure out what it really is that you want to do, and, you know, chase something that you're going to be passionate about. You know, up until that point, every job that I had was exactly that. It was a job. It wasn't necessarily a career. And have always wanted to be in the outdoors and help people with whatever it may be, you know, hunting or fishing or land or farms, or just I love being involved in anything in that part of the world. And I got my real estate license and crossed paths with Mr. Ronnie Richardson with National Land. And as most people know, Ronnie can talk you into just about anything. So,
I was going to say, for those that don't know, we're talking about somebody who's been in the land industry, you know, forever, and is probably one of the more charismatic people that you're ever going to step across anywhere.
He is.
There's a lot of agents that he has gotten on board here.
I will honestly say, when I first sat down with him, I did not know what to think. I was like, is this guy just, I mean, he didn't come across as a phony or anything, but I was like, man, is he just buttering me up, or what?
Is this a real person?
Right. And I actually ended up, when we got done with our conversation, he had came up and saw me in Fayetteville. He said, here's a number to, I can't remember who it was, somebody else that was with the company that was an agent. He said, here's number so-and-so. If you got any questions that I didn't answer, just give them a call. You know, and I was like, well, I sat on it for a couple of days, and I said, well, I'm going to give this old guy a call and just see what. And he's like, man, he said, Ronnie's just a big personality. And he said, I know he's kind of hard to take in the beginning, but he said, I promise you, he's not leading you in the wrong direction. And I said, okay. And ever since then, it's just we've been thick as thieves. So.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I need to have him on the show sometime. I don't even want to talk about anything in particular. I just want to let him go.
Yeah, for sure.
Comes out of it. I need to get him on here. But yeah, so we're here to discuss sort of the techniques, usages, and you know, pros and cons of tree stand hunting versus spot and stalk, and you know, as it pertains to land, as it pertains to in general. But a lot of the time when we're discussing things, it's usually, talking about private land. And in this case, different tools are more useful in different scenarios, especially when you look at public land And then geographically, when you look at East versus West, you see a lot of differences in styles and techniques, but there's usages for all those in different areas. So walk me through it, Ryan. Tell me about your experience and sort of, your rundown.
Well, I've grown up hunting. I'm originally from Oklahoma City, so I've grown up spending a lot of time in what we call the Cross Timbers region of Oklahoma, which is a little west of Oklahoma City, is the western boundary, and then over close by Tulsa and over towards the eastern border of the state, close to Arkansas. That band of land there, they call it the Cross Timbers because it's where the Ozarks and the Ouachitas out of Missouri and Arkansas meet up with the plains of central and western Oklahoma. And it is an area that has been naturally created with pockets and blocks of timber and large openings that, were never bulldozed. They were just created that way naturally. And so it kind of sets itself up to be open for either style of hunting, because a lot of the trees, especially the farther west you get in the cross timbers, the trees get shorter and bushier. So it's hard to get up in a tree in that terrain. And then the farther east you go, the heavier and taller the timber gets and the more contiguous the timber gets. So it kind of lends itself more to being up in a tree. So,
right. Oh no, I was agreeing with you. Like, yeah, that makes sense. Like thicker timber, you want to be up high.
Okay. Yeah. So, I've kind of found in my experience that whether I'm in, Oklahoma or Arkansas, which the two states that I hunt the most, I tend to be stationary and elevated most of the time, whether it be in a tree stand, in a tripod, in an elevated box blind. But I'm also hunting a piece of ground that I have some type of control over, whether I've got a food plot planted or I'm hunting farmer's field or there's a feeder or whatever the case may be. I've taken several trips into the western U.S. chasing mule deer and antelope. And that out there, when we go out there, it is 100% spot and stalk. And the terrain out there, it lends itself very well to that style because you've got the elevation to get up above what you're after. Just like you would in a tree stand or a box blind, but the country is so open and you may see what you're after a mile and a half away, and you can, use your glass, your spot and scope, your binoculars to find the animal that you would like to take, and then use the terrain to make a move to get closer to that animal and get a shot on it.
Yeah, we were talking just before kind of we started, and I feel like I was naive until a fairly late point in life. I grew up out west and I'd never even seen anybody use a tree stand like ever in my life. I had seen them on hunting shows and it was just kind of it never really processed that like that was a big, like I said, I'd be kind of naive. And I remember going to a hunting show back east out in Pennsylvania, and they had tree stands and they were even showing grain for food plots. And I remember again, silly me walking up and asking them like, what's the grain for? And they're like, well, it's for your food plot. I was like, wait, you plant a crop? Like that's like you put food in the ground to bring it. Tell me more. And so I remember going through it the first time and it just kind of blew my mind. And that was sort of my thought process was, like, you bring up a crop that the animals eat and they come in. So it's like, you don't have to go chase them. They just come into you. This is new.
Right.
And there's a lot of, there's hardcores on both sides of that discussion of, I would never sit in a tree stand, or I would, would never waste my time thumping around in the bushes, like whatever it is, there's people on both sides of it. But I think the number one thing is that both techniques for hunting are spreading, right? You have more, I hear more spot and stock back east just to try it and to use it. And then I've started seeing tree stands out west, and like you'll be walking through public land and just walk up on someone's tree stand out there in the middle of nowhere. Like, oh, somebody had an idea. And so like there's all kinds of, people are blending the two instead of being so hardcore on one or the other. And there's usages for both, right?
Right. I definitely think that the number one thing that we can do as outdoorsmen is, whether you use a certain tactic or a certain brand or a product or not, we've all got to stick together. There's quite a large group of people out in the world that would like to see us not be able to harvest an animal. And when we've got, compound hunters talking bad about crossbow hunters and tree stand talking bad about people hunting off the ground, we need to stay united. And but yes, I think most people, like you said, it's kind of starting to blend a little bit instead of being super hardcore for one or the other, and just using the tactic that fits best for that situation at that point in time.
Yeah, I always kind of fall back on it. It's sort of just a mantra that I keep with any of my hobbies or my pursuits, is that nobody likes a purist. Like anybody that looks at other people like, well, they don't do it the way that I do it, so they don't do it right. Like nobody likes that person. Don't be that person. Like don't go out there and tell everybody that they're wrong just because you do something. No one likes a purist.
Right. Right.
It happened. I do a lot of fly fishing, and it's very common with fly fishing. It's very common with hunting. It's definitely an outdoors thing. So, tell me a little bit about, what are your ideal situation for tree stand hunting, and how do you set it up?
I would say my number one ideal situation for tree stand hunting would be some type of funnel, whether it be natural or man-made funnel in the timber during the rut. That's number one in my books. As far as hunting out of a tree stand in the woods during the rut, it's just those bucks are, especially in an area like where I'm hunting, spending most of my time in the woods where there is a lot of timber, those bucks aren't keying in on what's above them. They're looking straight ahead. They're looking for that doe. So getting up above them is just more advantageous to your goals. I've got a place that I hunt in northeastern Oklahoma. And on the neighbor's property, there's a big, flat, wooded, just hardwood ridge. And as that ridge comes across the property line onto the 40 acres that I hunt, that ridge starts to get narrower and narrower and narrower. And then it starts to fall into the creek bottom. So there's like a spine that comes down off of that big, flat ridge down into the creek bottom. And I have a tree stand that is set up. There's a little opening in the woods where that ridge was 150 yards wide on the neighbors, and it's coming down to that pinch point at about where it gets to about 50 to 60 yards wide. There's a little opening up there, and I've got a tree stand right on the edge of it, and I can go hunt that tree opening day of bow season for the first month of season and not see a deer. And I can go hunt that tree in December after the rut's over and not see a deer. But for 2 weeks, from about Halloween to November 15th, every buck that touches that property will come through that pinch point, because it's just the easiest way for them to get from that big flat down into that creek.
And you see that a lot during the rut, right? Like, where I hunt out west, you wait for the weather to push the bucks down because they go back into secluded areas during the year. They move solitary. They're not right. Herding up or anything like that. And the older and wilier they are, the further back they go. And then you get that first cold snap when rut starts, and they all drop. They drop into the lower areas where the does are. It's like they find the gathering places and they all come down low, and otherwise you just never see them. So, I mean, in your case, what you're talking about too is like a camera wouldn't do a lot of good either, right? Like you could watch your trail cam all year and it's not going to tell you the story.
Right. I have a trail camera on that trail that leads through that opening. They always make a couple scrapes there on the edge of that opening. And I go ahead and put the trail camera out, first week of October. And, there'll be a doe or two come through there, or maybe a buck or two just randomly, may get one or two pictures a week at a random time, might be the middle of the day, might be the middle of the night. And then right around Halloween, when the bucks really start hitting scrapes and really start cruising to look for that first doe, that camera just comes alive. It's amazing how many deer go through that opening in that 2 to 3 week period in the beginning of November.
So you're saying, good use of Treestand is really, it comes from experience, right? Like you've got to know the behavior of the animal in that particular type of season, right? Because if you were trying to figure out where to put a trail cam one year, where to put a tree stand one year, you might throw a trail cam out and watch the months coming up to the rut, but it's still not, you might not end up putting your tree stand in a great location because you don't see any animals and they come through a rut. Like you've got to learn the territory and know the behavior sort of in advance, or have a trail cam up during the rut and see if you see things particularly to that time period, and maybe bank on setting it up for the next year. Where you've really got to do your research, because you lack that mobility to get you around, and you are in a tree.
Right. Well, I mean, and it's going to be different on every property. I mean, you can go on YouTube or the Outdoor Channel and watch as many videos as you want of, some guy sitting on the edge of the food plot, and there's a river bottom back here behind him, and there's one big tree line of cottonwoods that comes out of the river, and that's where all 80 deer walk out into that alfalfa field every night. So exactly, you've got to learn what the animals want to do, or not what they want to do, but how they act on the particular piece of ground that you're hunting. If, I'm sure if you just grab a tree stand and go throw it up in the middle of a block of woods, are you going to see an animal if you sit there 15 times in a row? Yeah, you probably will, but you may not be in the best location on that piece of property.
Right. And I always get a kick out of that with the hunting shows and stuff, because they're always in the ideal situation, right? Like exactly like you said. And I've actually, some friends of mine have worked with, outdoor riders and outdoor chefs, and have hunted with like Hank Shaw a little bit. He does like, Duck Moose and a few other cookbooks. But through that, I think at one point he tried getting Steve Ranella to go out and hunt in our area. And it was basically along the lines of, if you get somebody like that, you have to be able to guarantee an animal.
Right.
Like, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. And they want you to guarantee success, which, is good business, but it's also not realistic for most outdoorsmen.
Right. Right.
So those situations, when they're ideal like that, I mean, it's pretty primed. I feel like the concept of tree stand next to a well-maintained food plot in a high traffic area is kind of self-explanatory, right? Like, you have the food, you get it to grow, the animals eat the food, you set up a tree stand and wait for the season to start. And,
right.
That part seems fairly, it's pretty common sense, right? But when it comes down to, let's say you go into a cold area, what are you doing first to figure out where to set up a tree stand? Like, okay, I want to figure out this new area. Maybe it's some private land. Like we'll talk into a case of private land. Maybe it's a new rec tract, and you want to figure out where to put it. There's going to be some inside knowledge, but like, let's just talk about walking in cold and trying to figure it out. What would you try to set up there?
Well, no matter what time of year it is, whether it's early season, middle of the season during the rut or late season, the first thing I'm doing is I'm looking at a topo map, or I'm looking at a bird's eye view, a satellite image where like my program on my phone that I use, I can lay the topo lines on top of the satellite image, so I can see where the trees are, where the open areas are, where the creeks are, but I can also see the contour lines on that image. So I'm going to use the terrain to tell me just first off, where to go. Because I kind of understand how the deer, especially over here in these hills, like how they use the terrain. For instance, if you just come over here in the Ozarks and pick a mountain. If you walk from the base of that mountain or that hill up to the top of it, I can almost guarantee you a third of the way down from the top, you are going to find a heavy, heavy, heavy deer trail. And I don't know why that is, but for some reason, the deer just really like to run the ridge just off of the top of it. That's just something that just experience has taught me, that there's almost always a really heavy trail a third of the way down the ridge. And then, you've got little points and, what we call hollers, drainages that come off of that mountain. And every difference in terrain like that is going to move those deer and funnel those deer in a different way. Now, specifically, if I was going to be hunting the rut in a timbered area, when I pull up that map, the first and the only thing that I am looking for is a pinch point. I am looking for where there's 20 acres of woods on the north end and 50 acres of woods on the south end, and two fields with a little 10-yard wide strip of trees between the two blocks of timber. I'm going right there. I'm putting my stand up and I'm parking my butt for a week. Because at some point, there is going to be a good buck that cruises between those two blocks of timber, and he's not going to walk through the middle of those hay fields. He's going to walk right down that little strip.
So a lot of it comes from experience of sort of knowing which pathways are preferred,
Right.
which kind of areas, and that's something that only experience can give you. Or if you feel like hitting the books ahead of time and jumping in and doing your learning. I always find one of our old quotes when I was younger was, find a graybeard or a mossback and listen.
Yeah.
Find somebody with some gray hair and ask them questions, and just so you're trying to accelerate your learning curve, because you might have 10 years of knowledge, but you can push 30 years of knowledge into your head in a very short amount of time by talking to somebody with some experience. And it's what's hard for me now is realizing that I have a lot of gray hair and coming to terms with like, oh no, I'm a graybeard.
Yeah, I definitely, I've learned a lot that a lot of my knowledge has come from growing up in a household where, my dad raised me in the woods, and, just being around him and all of his friends that have done it for so long. And which, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of stuff that some of those old timers do that I don't use. I know when I was growing up, we did a lot of deer drives where we would push the deer. We would line up.
Oh yeah. And that's something I've never been able to pull off. I've never seen it done. I know a lot of people do it.
Right. Which that wasn't something coming from my dad and his friends and their generation. That was a tactic that came from the generation before them, their parents. Same way with the first time that I went out west to Wyoming on a mule deer hunt, we went with my dad and all of his buddies and their parent, their dads, and all the older crew wanted to do was 2 people on either side of a canyon. And if it had a good flat bottom in it, 1 person in the bottom and a couple people down at the bottom of the canyon, and you push the canyon out.
You know what's funny about you're talking about this, the driving and the way to hunt a canyon. And I mean, I guess I'm wrong. I have done it, but we did it for rabbit hunting was how we would do that. It's exactly because I'd never seen people walk in a line, and it was like, okay, no one get out front and everyone pay attention to where everybody is, and we push. And then you find, a steep area, and it's like someone's got ravine, someone has rim, and you push through that. Same exact kind of thing. But so I guess I have seen those and done those just for different game.
Right. Yeah. It is just a totally different ball game. Everybody trying to stay in a line. And I mean, back whenever I was doing it with the guys that my dad hunted with, we had walkie talkies. I mean, it was a real big production to push those canyons and stuff. But probably the second or third time we went, one of the guys that was there, he kind of went off on his own, and he come back second or third day with a really good buck. And everybody was like, well, where'd you go? What'd you do? And he said, I went down there to that little bluff where I could see all those alfalfa fields on the river. And I waited on the one that I wanted to go up in the canyon back onto the public. And I figured out which canyon he was in. I went and found him and I killed him.
So he ran a spot and stock in the middle of everybody else running lines.
And that's where it all switched. Cause I can remember my dad saying like, oh, we need to do something different. This walking and pushing deer and trying to, hit them on the run. Just, this is a lot harder than it should be. And when that old boy, was successful with that from that point on, that was the way we would still go in a group, and we would still do some drives, but it was, instead of 7 days of doing deer drives, it was 2 days of doing deer drives and 5 days of everybody hunting on their own. So,
yeah. So when was your first experience running kind of like a big country spot and stock, and what was that? So how did you get introduced to that, and what was that like?
So my first experience being out west on big open country like that was when I was 16. And I mean, in all honesty, the buck that I shot on that first trip, we just stumbled on the deer. It wasn't a planned thing. We hadn't been watching them. We were just out and had been walking around glassing, and we're heading back to the truck, and he skylighted himself up on the ridge, was laying up on top of the ridge. But the first trip that I went on when I wasn't with my dad, when it was me and one of my good buddies, and it was going to be our first big, long, out west trip on our own, that was the first time that we really, really got into the spot and stalk. And, we didn't take any monsters or anything like that on that trip, but we both shot a respectable buck for the area. And that's how we did it. We got up, at daybreak, and we were out in the area where we wanted to be when the sun came up, and it was just find that high point. And there were days where we would only glass for an hour and get bored, and we'd go move somewhere else. And then there were other days where we would glass for 4 or 5 hours, sitting in one spot. And it will test you. I think there's something in your head, when you're sitting in a tree stand for 5 hours in the woods and you don't see anything, I don't think it affects you as much because you can only see what you can see. But when you're out west and you're got your eyes in a pair of binoculars and you're sitting in the same spot for 4 hours and you're like, but what's over that hill over there?
That's so funny, because that's our joke with and I think just everybody does it, is what's over that ridge.
Yeah,
it's like, well, it's a mile away and we got to gain 800 feet of elevation.
Yeah,
got an hour. So you just got to do it anyways.
Right. So the last couple of times that I've been out west, we tend to always, I have never been like on a true like backpack backcountry in the timberline. I always end up in the foothills. Like I think the first time we went, we were in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. where they're coming out into the plains on the west side of the mountain range. And then the second time, or this last time, we were down in southeastern Wyoming, right on the Colorado border. I can't remember. It was a national forest, but we kind of tend to stick to more of the open country just because it's different than what we get to hunt. You know, we're hunting a lot of timber here.
Yeah.
But I haven't really, I don't really, you know, when I go out there, I don't really know enough about what are they eating? What's the preferred food source right now? You know, I just get on a vantage point and look for deer. And if I don't see any, I move to the next vantage point. And we may travel 10 miles without seeing any deer before we get into them. Now, normally once we get into them, they're there for a reason. So they're there for several days in a row, you know? But definitely like what you were talking about with the weather pushing them down, the time that we went and when we were hunting day one in the snow, there were deer everywhere. Last year when we went, it was 78 degrees outside, I think, on opening morning. And we struggled big time hunting.
Those are hard hunts. Well,
stations and rolling hills before there had been any snow.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then if you take it animals, like if you're after elk or something like that, where they don't necessarily, they'll be in the snow and out of the snow, but they will hug the snow line. And
right.
You gotta kind of gauge where the snow line is or has been for the last couple of weeks. Because if it recedes, then you don't quite know where everything is. It gets a little wonky like that. But the big thing that I'm hearing from you is a very pragmatic approach where you sort of do what the terrain dictates, right?
Yep.
Where if it's thick, and you know, I've just got back from Alaska and we thought we were going to run some spot and stalk hunts out there. And we got into the timber and realized what the timber is like, because we hadn't been there. And so we finally got into the timber in Alaska. And it was, you had about 20 feet of visibility. Like, this is nuts. And
right.
Realizing you had to get to above the tree line or to clear cuts or things like that, to where, you're talking about an ideal tree stand situation, where you can set that up, but wouldn't have thought about that beforehand, that would be what it is. But so yeah, what you're talking about is more sort of just pragmatic. Like, if it's thick and there's lots of trails, run a tree stand. If it's open, you can run spot and stalk. Have you done sort of some brush pounding, I don't call it necessarily spot and stalk, but it's more like jump shooting, right? You're just seeing what you can spook and where.
Yeah. I mean, what the guys, I've listened to several podcasts, and what I hear most people calling it is still hunting or slip hunting, where you're not just walking through the woods, one step after another. You're trying to blend in and, a few steps at a time, pause, and just observing what's around you. I have done it.
They're calling that slip hunting?
Slip hunting.
Okay. It's like, to me, it's like calling a strike indicator. It's like trying to call a bobber a strike indicator. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's good though. You have names to the planet.
It's called slip hunting or still hunting.
Still hunting is just staying in one place?
No, it's moving around, but being very still in the process.
This sounds like sneaky and super sneaky.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think they should make the term. They need to adjust the terms and at least make them funny. Like, are you hunting sneaky today or super sneaky? I'm super sneaky.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, the two places that I hunt the most, one of which I own and one that's a family friend's place across the line in Oklahoma, they're both 40-acre tracts. So I try my very best not to overpressure them, not to just get in there and make a bunch of ruckus and blow them out. Because there's probably plenty of days where I can go out there and hunt and there's not even a deer on that 40 acres at that time. They're on the neighbors, Now, when I went on some larger public tracks, not just out west, but even in like Oklahoma, we'll do that. We'll do that from time to time. We will just get on foot in the woods, in the thick stuff, and just slip around until we find fresh sign, whether it be, if it's feeding sign, whether we found a good oak tree that's dropping lots of acorns and there's a lot of droppings around it, or if it's rut sign, if we're finding a lot of scrapes and rubs and stuff like that, and then we really start to slow down, and we may hunker down and find a bush to hide behind for a little while and just wait and see what comes by. I haven't had a lot of success with it, but I am also, when I am on foot and not sitting in a tree stand or a blind, I'm a very impatient person. Once again, what's on the other side of the creek? So that tends to not work very well for me.
And I like how you defined it. Whereas when you're in a tree stand, there's not really a choice, right? You can't just take down your tree stand and move it somewhere else. Like, you just make do, and that's where you are, and you don't suffer from that impatience. Right. Like, I think that's the quandary that everybody runs into when they do anything outside of a tree stand, or, let's say just from any ambush scenario, right? Because you don't necessarily need a tree stand to be, I guess, what you would call it, hidden or waiting. I would just call it an ambush style of hunting, where, you could be sitting behind a rock and stay there in an open country hunt, because, it's a high traffic area and you can just station out.
Right.
But that's the one thing. And I do love the sneaky and the super sneaky, styles, because there's the opposite that I've hunted with a lot, throughout my life, where there's certain individuals who I won't name or give my affiliation with them, so I don't throw them under the bus. But I just call them jump shooters, where they basically just pound every piece of brush and walk and like they're walking and rummaging around and just causing chaos, in the woods, which makes it hard to hunt. But that's sort of they're so impatient that, like, oh, I have to see what's on that ridge, and I waited 5 minutes and there was nothing here, so I went to the next ridge. And the last time I did that, I was with my longbow, which is like, this does not work for me. Like, it's very, very challenging in certain respects, but it can be effective, especially for that noon time where things are bedded down and you don't want them walking by. You can jump them up. But I guess there's subgenres, right? It's not just spot and stalk. It's sneaky and super sneaky and loud and
stationary sneaky. Yeah. Well, and you talking about sneaky versus super sneaky. There's a guy that he was a guest on a podcast that I listened to, called The Southern Outdoorsman. And the guy's out of Mississippi. He's actually a real estate broker himself. His name's Travis Murray. And he was telling a story about his uncle being a very experienced and very good woodsman, not a hunter, woodsman,
just good outdoors,
and good. He just fit in seamlessly in the woods. And he was talking about being on one of these deer drives where he was the stationary person waiting on them to push the deer his way. And he said, I was sitting there and I just saw something move in to my right in my peripherals, and boom, there popped my uncle. And he looked at me and he just put his finger up on his lips, like telling me to be quiet. And then he just drifted back off into the woods. And he said, I never heard him. I never heard him coming. We're in hardwood timber with 6 inches of leaf litter on the ground. And he slipped up on me within 30 yards of me before I ever saw him. And then within 15, 20 seconds, he just went on down the ridge and just disappeared. So
telling you, man, gray beards and mossbacks.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, and there's I feel like my friends and I invented a new technique, which I don't know what you would call it, maybe a drive-by. And it's not what it sounds like. It's not shooting at a vehicle. It's not what it sounds like. But it was the deer in a certain area we noticed would not react to any kind of UTV. So you can go in a four-wheeler side by side, and the deer wouldn't react because UTVs and four-wheelers normally don't harass the deer. And so they would kind of hang out. But we realized as soon as you get out, they take off.
Right.
They see that two-legged thing that's a threat to them, and it's time to go. So we had the ingenious idea, again, a longbow hunt, where we would drive and see where they were, and they were within 40 yards of the road. I was like, okay, I need to get on these, but I need to be hidden to do it. So we slowed down to about 15 miles an hour, and I had to pick the biggest sagebrush to land in, and slowed down to that and ejected myself out of the UTV at 15 miles an hour and went through like 3 sagebrush, curling up with the bow so I don't damage it. And then belly crawled, to get where I wanted to be. And then I realized I didn't know, where the animals were as compared to me. And I popped up and I'm in the middle of a herd. And there's sagebrush between me and every single deer around me. I'd screwed up the hunt. I snapped a twig and they all busted, but it was hilarious because it worked. It was.
Yep.
If I could have been a better hunter in the moment, it would have worked out for me. So I think the drive-by is a good technique as well.
That's an awesome story. Yeah, as long as you don't stop, whether on a four-wheeler and side by side or in a pickup truck,
that's it, yeah.
They do not react to those vehicles because especially if you're hunting in an area where there's any type of farming or ranching going on, there's always the guy out checking his fences, checking his cows, in his tractor, whatever the case may be, Yeah. And they just do, or you may be in an area, in a national forest area where there's cars going by to the hiking trail, all day long. They just do not react to a moving vehicle.
No, it's a thing. Well, the key here is, it was my friend's idea, so I should have known that I would be jumping out of a vehicle. Just first and foremost. Whenever somebody comes to you and says, I have an idea, you can bank on some kind of like spectacular show about to happen. And don't turn down those ideas because they can work out.
No kidding. Yeah, for sure.
Well, excellent, man. Well, hey, any other thoughts on what's your preference? What's sort of, what do you prefer between the two?
Man.
And now we've decided, we've also defined some subvariants of this, right? We don't just have spot and stock. We have sneaky and super sneaky, and I'm adding drive-by just because it's hilarious. And, you don't necessarily need a tree stand. You can be stationary, but you can also ambush from like rock fields or elevated positions, like you said, establish, where you're glassing from. But like, what's sort of like your best moment and what's your favorite?
I mean, I always tell people that my favorite hunt period, my favorite animal period to go after is a mule deer. And I don't know what it is that I like about them. I just really like the species, and I don't get to do it every day. So I think spot and stalk on the ground, chasing a mule deer, that is what I would say is my preferred hunt or my favorite hunt. But if I lived in Wyoming or Montana and that's how I had to do it every day, it's very situational for me. It's like, what am I chasing? Okay, here's my favorite way to do it.
There's something to be said for that too, because I know living in an area with a lot of mule deer, a lot of us will target whitetail just because it's the eating, right? They're not as rugged of an animal as compared to a mule deer are very, very, you're talking about a tough animal. And
being up in the rim of a canyon on a shelf. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of us that will target that. And it's like, it's funny when we go anywhere else, it's like everybody just hears about the mule deer or elk. Elk is the other one. Yeah. Which, I mean, it's like the size of a Volkswagen and disappears like a ghost. It's a pretty formidable kind of thing. But you do tend to take it for granted what you have around, but then there's also sort of the process, right? Because like you were saying, in a certain place where you realize, I think we were talking before we hopped on, just realizing what it's all about. It's more the experience of the hunt for the most part, rather than, hey, I got my thing. And it's those moments where you get like, oh, this is beautiful, or this was really hard, but I made it to the top of this ridge.
Yeah.
It's those kind of things that kind of become part of it.
Well, that's what I've got a Bible verse. I don't have it written out. I just have the book and page in my email signature, and it's my favorite verse. And it is, "The lazy do not roast any game, but the diligent feed on the riches of the hunt." And I'm sure if you read that and you think about it completely literally, well, the riches of the hunt, that's what the food you come home with, and I'm sure that's how it was meant when it was written. But when I read it, to me, the riches of the hunt are everything that happens while you're there. The riches of the hunt is the experience, is the camaraderie, is the cooking, the setting up camp, the road trip to get there. That, to me, that is the riches of the hunt. And that is the best part, is the experience.
I was going to say some of my best experiences happen when we don't have any kind of luck. We had spring bear this year, and we went up and there was a late snowstorm, and we got up there. I think it was 5 degrees when we got up top, and we were camping up top, and you don't pack up sticks or anything. So you have to find sticks to make a fire, and there's no fire pit. Like, we're on a ridge line and just staked out, and hoping that the branches that were under 5 feet of snow that we can dig through and find will burn. Just one of those kind of experiences. And we got done and we're walking out. And I just remember us saying, like, that was awesome. Like, we didn't see a single animal. Right. It was still awesome. So I can identify with that verse.
Yep. It's a good one. And I agree with you. It's always the stories that I tell the most are always the ones that have a big event in them. Not necessarily a big animal got killed, but the ones that are the best stories are always the ones where you had an unforgettable experience.
Somebody forgot their sleeping bag or something.
We drove 3 hours to go hunt public land, and I left the whole ice chest full of food sitting in the garage.
Yes.
So we ate trail mix and Sonic for 4 days.
Trail mix and Sonic.
I had a 5-pound bag of trail mix that I luckily did put in the truck, and there was a Sonic about 15 miles away. So that was food for 4 days, was Sonic and trail mix.
That'll fix your Sonic addiction for a while.
No kidding.
Oh man. Well, hey, Ryan, any kind of last thoughts? I want to make sure that we're on time and budget here. Fundamentally, and I like your approach too, is that do what the terrain dictates, and don't be a purist. No one should do one thing and that's it. Like, if you do that, you're not really getting the full experience. And so try out new things, try out new ideas. Don't just walk in a line. Was it your uncle or your dad? Which one was you talking about went off? And
what's that now?
You were talking about everybody hunting in a line, and one of the party went off and just chose to do spot and stock. Was it your dad? Or
it was a buddy of my dad.
It was a buddy of your dad's. Okay. Yeah. It is like, don't be afraid to try new things. Like, that's, you don't have to be afraid of other people's ideas. There's all kinds of methods and ways to go about it.
Right. And not only doing what the terrain dictates and not being a purist that only does one thing, but do what you think is best and what you enjoy. Just because 4 of your buddies are all hunting the same property out of a tree stand doesn't mean you can't hunt off the ground. If that's the way you feel most comfortable, then that's the way you need to do it.
I like that approach. I think more people should think like that.
Yep.
All right, man. Hey, it is always a pleasure talking to you, man. And again, remind everybody, where do you work and what do you specialize in?
Work for National Rent.
You messed that part up.
National Land Realty. And we specialize in all types of land, acreages, houses on acreages, commercial land, timberland, farms, hunting tracks, timber tracks, all of it.
And how does somebody get a hold of you? Where do you work?
I work in Northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, Rogers area. And I also work Northeast Oklahoma, and they can get in touch with me by email or phone. And all of my information is on nationalland.com.
Ryan, I will have your link and to your profile in the podcast notes, and we will get that information posted.
All right. I appreciate it.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Thanks.
This concludes episode number 27 of the National Land Realty Podcast, discussing spot and stock hunting versus tree stand hunting with one and the only Ryan Harris out of Little Rock, Arkansas. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com. Quick reminder, please like, review, and share our show. Our show doesn't get found if people don't talk about it and hit that like button. So if you found this show valuable, others will too. Make sure to share it. As we get reviews, we'll share them on the podcast. Now, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.